and books and books and books and books and books and books and books. All right, we will start this by acknowledging, hi, you. We're going to acknowledge you. Hey, friends. Welcome back to another pizza party. I'm Mrs. Pizza. This is Cheese. She's wearing her sweater because it's cold. This is Weenie. She's perfect. There's a very fluffy dog outside right now. 3 giant fluffy dogs. Are we gonna bark? I'm just gonna whine a little. Thoughts on the fluffiness? That was very fluffy. All right, we are gonna acknowledge at the top that I actually recorded this entire video. It was long. I talked a lot. And then when I went to edit it, I was out of focus 89% of the time. I don't know why I didn't notice it sooner. You gonna sit in my lap? Okay, we're gonna start this over. How was your 2024? Really? Yeah, that sounds about right. Mine was all over the place, but I did do some good reading. So let's talk about my top books of the year 2024. Okay, so I decided to do this in categories. I picked categories that kind of summed up my reading taste, since my reading taste is kind of all over the place. It's a little bit more whatever the heck I'm in the mood for. And so I picked categories and went through and picked my favorite books that I read this past year that were the top in those categories. Some of these categories, they get an honorable mention because there was more than one book that I thought I needed to talk about, but I picked the top book, and then there might be another one that we just need to talk about. The first category, I read a lot of fantasy, and I decided to split my fantasy reads into several different categories. The first one we're going to talk about is the one that I've been thriving within this year, and that is funny fantasy. The funny fantasy winner of my heart for books that I read this year is going to be Guards by Terry Pratchett. I am early into my Terry Pratchett Discworld journey, and I am loving it here. I'm loving being with all of these crazy characters, just careening through this world. When I first started delving into funny fantasy, the books that always came up when you did any sort of research into what everybody's favorite funny fantasy books were, Discworld, Terry Pratchett, there was always talk of Discworld books. The series within itself, which has like something like 40 plus books, has many different parts where you can start. There are series within the series. I have read, I think about 5 or 6 books at this point, and I decided to pick my favorite, and that is Guards. This is the story of Carrot, and he is a young man who is raised by dwarves. But for some reason, Carrot never realized that he wasn't a dwarf. He was a human. One day, the man who raised him, his father, pulls him aside, and he's like, hey, buddy, I don't know how you haven't figured this out yet, but you're not a dwarf. You're a human. You're topping off at like 6 foot something, and everybody else here is barely hitting 5 feet. So you need to go off and spend some time with some humans. And so he packs Carrot up, sends him off to a great big city where Carrot experiences living among humans for the first time and joining this group of people known as the City Watch. He takes his job very seriously because another thing you should know is dwarves don't understand sarcasm. They take everything literally, and so Carrot takes everything literally. This story is full of mysteries. There's secret societies. There's Carrot kicking butt and taking names. It's silly. It's funny. It's fun. You will read this with a grin on your face. I'm really excited to continue on with this series within Discworld because I believe recently the second book, which is The Night Watch, has just been picked up and considered a new classic and is going to be published, I think, within Penguin Classics. It has reached classic literature status. It is such a funny, fun, good time. If you haven't read Guards, you can definitely start here within Discworld if you want to, and I loved the heck out of this. The honorable mention for funny fantasy, because again, I was in my funny fantasy moment in 2024, was The Black Tongue Thief. This story is the story of Kinch, and he is a thief and he has a black tongue, hence the title. Kinch is behind on payments to the Thief Guild because in this world, when you come up through these thief schools and move into these thief guilds, you have to pay money back to the Thief Guild in order to pay for your education and what have you. Kinch is behind on payments when he and a group of thieves decide to rob someone on the side of the road. They make a terrible choice and victim, and through happenstance and circumstances, Kinch ends up going on an adventure with the person he tried to rob job in the first place. Kinch is the narrator of our entire story and is the kind of person that would make you laugh at a funeral. He finds the dark humor in everything and makes light of some very dark circumstances. Every once in a while, the veil slips. You get a hint at Kinch understands that this is very dark or horrible, the things that are happening, but yet he's going to keep you laughing and trying to keep the humor, his sarcastic, dry humor this entire time. We are existing in a world that is post-war, that is dire, where things like thieves' guilds run everything, and Kinch is on this adventure crossing this country. I had a really good time with The Black Tongue Thief. The next category is just straight up fantasy. Let's just talk about the fantasy book that won my heart. That would be the prequel to The Black Tongue Thief, The Daughter's War. This is book 0, The Black Tongue Thief being book 1 in the series. So this is a very contained story taking place before the events of The Black Tongue Thief, following a different character as our narrator. This is the story of Galva, who is a young woman who is trained as a warrior to fight against the goblins. See, in this world, goblins and humans have gone to wars multiple times. They just can't seem to, it never ends. They fight a war and then the goblins pop back up again. Even though you were introduced to goblins in the first book, goblins are very central to these circumstances in this book, and goblins are terrifying. So after multiple wars that have left everything decimated and there are barely any men left, they have to start sending the women off to war, hence the Daughter's War, hence Galva ending up on the front lines of battle. This is given to you in the format of Galva recounting the story after the fact. She's telling you about her experience in the Daughter's War, which is a very pivotal war in the world that we are now living in the series as a whole. And it is absolutely heartbreaking at points because you have those moments where Galva can say, and this is the last time I ever saw this person, and then start the story about the moment she saw this person for the last time, or this was the biggest battle that ever happened, and then go into the story. So you know the tragic outcome of almost everything, and yet it doesn't lessen the impact. There is a moment in this book where you are reading a letter that Galva's father writes to her brother that is presented at a very specific moment in the story that I read with tears in my eyes. This hit me in the chest. I really loved The Daughter's War. I will say, because I've gotten this question now a couple of times when I've talked about this book, I do believe you should read The Black Tongue Thief first. Technically, you could read this without having read The Black Tongue Thief. I don't think it would have the impact that it does if you've already read that story, but I also feel like the ending of this would feel a little abrupt. This is a very contained, specific story, and so without knowing where the story goes from here, I feel like this would feel like a very kind of abrupt ending. That being said, this is definitely my favorite of the two books. The honorable mention I have for this, which I really think that I almost created a completely different category just to put this story in, is The Six Deaths of the Saint. And this is an incredibly short story. This is about, I think it's like 30, 31, 32 pages, and was released along with a bunch of other stories with Amazon exclusive originals. So Amazon got a bunch of fantasy writers together, released a bunch of short stories, and this one is amazing and definitely worth your time. Plus, it's only 30-something pages. You could read it so fast. This is the story of a young person who is on the brink of death when someone arrives, collects them, and takes them off into another life, is how we'll put it. I'm not giving you more than that. This is 30 pages, and I refuse to spoil this for you. It's so perfect. It's so amazing. Even though I would read more in this world, I don't need more from the story. It is a full and complete story within the short amount of pages. It's really good, and I highly recommend picking it up. The next category I gave myself was Romantasy. I read a lot of Romantasy. I enjoy Romantasy, so we needed a Romantasy category. The book that I feel like I have shouted at the most people to read this year is also the winner in my heart of this category, and that is Peaches and Honey. This is, and I keep saying this to people, if you enjoyed The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, I feel like this is the soul sister to that story. It's like these two authors were in the same creative writing class, were given the same prompt, but went in very different directions. Peaches and Honey, for me, is the direction I wish The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue went. See, this is the story of Anna, and she is a young woman living in ancient times, and she has has vitiligo. So at this point in history, no one knew what vitiligo was. They didn't realize it was just skin. And so Anna has been ostracized from the village, from the people around her, and lives a very solitary existence, surviving by herself. They're worried she might be a witch or contagious, and so not only do they push her to the outskirts, but they're not too nice to her either. But that doesn't change who Anna is. Anna is kind, Anna is lovely, Anna is the best kind of person. When one day Anna is foraging for supplies, she encounters a young woman fleeing a mob. She helps this young woman escape from these people and then offers her some of the meager things that Anna has, food and shelter. And so this woman, seeing the kindness in Anna, offers Anna a gift. See, the woman that Anna helped was a god, and she gives Anna a gift that bestows upon her immortality. Now, the thing about this is that's the only power it gives her. It just has an abundance of time. And so you travel through centuries with Anna, who is just the best kind of person. The reason I adore this is because you spend centuries with Anna, brushing up against historic events and sometimes encountering other immortals. She stays true to herself the entire time. Anna is kind, and she's the best kind of person, and she gets to travel through centuries. Also, maybe there's a slow burn relationship with an immortal shapeshifting god. This is extremely slow burn if you're looking for that. There is a romance aspect to this, and I absolutely adored this story. This is a duology, but I haven't continued on yet because I don't think I'm emotionally prepared for that second book, but I really loved Peaches and Honey. Our next category is horror. I love a spooky book any time of year, and so I feel like I try and sneak them in whenever I can. But the spooky book that definitely stuck with me the most this year was We Used to Live Here. This book was, I believe, a web series, took off, was traditionally published, and now the rights have been optioned and will eventually be coming to Netflix as some sort of series, movie, what have you. I heard all the buzz about this and decided to see what it was about for myself. And I really was creeped out by this, but I think you have to be affected by a specific type of horror for this to work for you. This is the story of Eve, and she and her partner Charlie are house flippers. They buy old homes, fix them up, turn around and sell them. They've just recently moved into their newest project when Charlie has to go to town for supplies or what have you, and Eve is left home alone when there's a knock at the door. When she answers, it is a traditional looking, very non-threatening family who say, "Hey, we used to live here. Do you mind if we take a look around inside?" Immediately, Eve gets the icky, creepy feelings. She knows she shouldn't let these people inside, even though she's not quite sure why. Unfortunately, Eve tends to be a little bit of a pushover. She's a little bit easy to walk over, and so these people eventually make their way inside, and the creepiness begins. This is a lot of uncanny horror. Things feel off. Things feel just not right, and that is where the creep factor in this resides. This is definitely something that I feel like will translate well to being on a screen because it's a lot of really visual oddness and slow moving things that just kind of get under your skin where you're going, what the heck is happening in this house? You're worried about Eve's mental state. Is she seeing these things? Are these things really happening? It's very creepy you don't even realize how much it's under your skin until it's there. I enjoyed this one, and I would definitely pick up more from this author in the future, but I also am very excited to see what the heck Netflix does with this. Next up, I decided I was going to talk about a cozy read because I read a lot of cozy books. I look for a lot of cozy books. The book that I enjoyed the most that was a cozy read this year was Someone You Can Build a Nest In, which I feel like I should also say this is a cozy horror fantasy romance. So it's a lot of things all mixed up in a very cozy but also gruesome package. Honestly, this is something I would definitely be looking for elsewhere. This was so much fun. This is the story of Secession, and she is a monster. She's kind of just a blob, just a goopy blob that lives in a pool of water in a dilapidated building outside of a village. When once again, monster hunters show up at her door trying to kill Secession, she is pushed out of her home when she comes upon Homily. The thing about Secession is she can shapeshift, and so using various things that she finds, she makes herself look like a person. When Homily encounters her, she thinks Secession is a person, not a monster. Because Homily is here because she believes a monster has put a curse on her family. But Shisheshan's never put a curse on anybody. This is a silly story where we have Shisheshan, who's an absolute monster, and she's literally eating people, but she's the least monstrous of the people around her. Homily's family are the real monsters of this story. It's funny, it's cozy, it's lovely. I had a great time, and I don't know how else to describe it other than I really enjoyed cozy horror fantasy romance. Shisheshan and Homily's story was a lot of fun. For our next category, I decided to go with sci-fi. And there were 2 books in this that I was going back and forth between, so we're going to make one the winner and one the honorable mention. For my top sci-fi of the year, I decided to go with Annihilation. I really enjoyed the heck out of this teeny, spooky, creepy sci-fi nonsense. This is a story of a group of researchers, all of which being women, who travel into a quarantined area known as Area X, where anomalies and strange things are happening. We are getting this all through a recounted story from one of the women on this expedition, and that is the biologist, but we also have an anthropologist, a psychologist, and a surveyor. They are all only referred to as their job titles, and things just are creepy and off from the very beginning. This is the kind of horror where if you glance at something quickly, you easily recognize it and move on, but the longer you look at something, the stranger it is, the more horrifying and off and creepy it becomes when you really spend the time to look at what's happening in Area X. The flora, the fauna, the fungus, it creeped me out, and it moved really, really quickly. I'm excited to continue on with this series, and this was definitely my favorite sci-fi of the year. Our honorable mention has to be Kindred. This, I feel like, is a very accessible sci-fi and is considered a modern classic, and it's kind of a little bit of a sin that it took me this long to read it. This is the story of Dana, and she is a young woman in the 70s in, I believe, California, and she is somewhat newly married and has just moved into a new apartment with her husband. When Dana starts experiencing involuntary time travel. You know from the opening of this book that Dana is going to experience horrific things with this time travel. It starts off with a bang, and you are following Dana as she has these involuntary time travel experiences where she is pulled back to the antebellum South. I believe she's in Maryland, where she is a Black woman living in the time of slavery in the South. It is horrifying. But she, the first time she is pulled back, encounters a young man who is drowning. She saves him, and our story starts there. Dana is trying to figure out why she's experiencing these things, why she is going to the time she is going to. And there's a lot of questions that are brought up through this time travel and unraveling of why Dana and why here and why these people, because of the nature of time travel. What can you affect if you change something, help someone, let someone know what's going to happen? This was really straightforward, and how I feel like it took me a while to wrap my head around the writing style, but once I got it, it was very clear. A lot of this is delivered to you in the way that a survivor would recount their experience. It is straightforward. It does not embellish on the smells and the sounds and the leaves and the trees. It is how someone who experienced something horrific would tell you about that experience. The example I use is Dana in one very specific scene is attacked by someone, and she says, point blank, "They kicked me in the head. I blacked out. When I woke up, I realized I was missing 2 teeth." It is brutal, but it is not embellished. That being said, you're not starved for the environment. You can picture where she is. The author gives you enough detail, but it does have that like straightforward, we are telling you about something brutal and we're not here to make it pretty or overly gruesome. We just want to relay what's happening to Dana. I really enjoyed this. I feel like it's masterful. I want to read more from this author. Our next section is going to be romance, and I decided to do a contemporary romance section and a dark romance section because that's kind of what I've been reading. For best contemporary romance, I decided to go with Funny Story, and this is, no surprise, Emily Henry. I love Emily Henry books, and I've read all of Emily Henry's books, and none of them have let me down yet. Funny Story is her most recent release, which is the story of Daphne, who is a young woman whose life has just exploded. Daphne was in a relationship with a man named Peter. She thought everything was perfect. They moved to the small town that his family used to summer in when he was younger. They're planning their wedding. everything has been going perfectly when, on the night of his bachelor party, Peter returns and says, "Just kidding. I'm in love with my childhood best friend Petra," and Peter and Petra run off into the sunset together. So Daphne's life exploded. And Daphne now has to find a place to live, so she ends up moving in with Miles, who is Petra, the woman that Peter just ran away with's ex-boyfriend. Both Miles and Daphne are dealing with breakups that just kind of came out of nowhere, and they're watching their exes live out their romantic, idealized dreams on social media when they come up with a plan to pretend to fake date, to get back at their exes, to act like they've moved on. And are you chewing your foot? No thanks. And it is a fake dating contemporary romance. I will say one of the big pluses about this was that everyone who should have been told about the fake dating was told about the fake dating. That is definitely something in romances that kind of drives me crazy, when people who should have been let in on the secret are not let in on the secret. In this book, they tell the right people about the secret. It makes sense. There's a lot of growth. It's realistic. The conflicts make sense. I enjoyed funny story. But I enjoy all Emily Henry books. For dark romance, I'm gonna be real honest. I'm a little bit of a wimpy wimp when it comes to dark romance, but I do like what I have dubbed medium roast romance, which is dark romance that's actually not all that dark. And my favorite in that category that I've made up myself and told you about is Butcher and Blackbird. This is a silly dark rom-com. It is something that you should definitely check your trigger warnings before you start, only to be completely confused about where the heck this story is going to go and be mildly intrigued. Honestly, you might just read it just to be like, well, now I want to know what happens. But you should read it because it's actually a pretty good time. This is the story of Sloane, and Sloane is a serial killer, but like a Dexter type serial killer. Sloane kills other serial killers. Sloane is a serial killer of bad guys. And so in the opening of this story, Sloane was trying to kill a super bad guy when she got caught in some sort of trap cage situation by accident, when another serial killer named Rowan shows up, and he's a fan. He loves what Sloane's been doing and is similar in his serial killing. They kill bad guys. When they kind of form a weird friendship that they decide to team up and make a game out of it, killing bad guys together. It's so funny, a little bit dark. And what I will say about this, and the reason these type of dark romances work for me, is because Sloane and Rowan are doing dark things. They are straight up serial killers, but they don't do the dark things to each other. They're doing bad things to bad people, but they don't necessarily do bad things to each other. And that I can get behind. I had a great time with this. I also read the sequel, which is Leather and Lark, and the third book, Scythe and Sparrow, I believe, comes out this year, and I'm very excited for the ending of this trilogy. It's a silly, funny, dark, good time. My runner-up in this category, Lights Out. This man with this really loud car drives by at least once a day now. It's fun for him. This is a TikTok sensation. If I'm the first one to tell you about this, that's exciting for me. This is another one I'm dubbing medium roast romance. It's a dark romance, but it's actually not that dark because there's a heck of a lot of consent to the things that are happening in the story. And we all love consent. This is the story of Allie, and she is an ER nurse, and her life sounds pretty tough. It's basically go to work, see horrible, come home, drink wine, go to sleep, rinse and repeat. Allie's life only has kind of one outlet that she keeps going back to, and that's thirst trap guys in masks on the internet. She likes these guys who do short form content of them wearing masks and being super hot about it. And one day, one of these guys who makes this content finds out Allie's into this because he's met her in real life, and he is like, absolutely, yes. I will be yours. You will be mine. Let's do this. It is a silly, fun, good time where we have these two people that are into this weird stuff. It's a very you're crazy matches my crazy type of romance. There is a heck of a lot of consent. And in case you're wondering, no third act breakup. This was really fun. And this author has a second book tentatively coming out this year, following a character that you're introduced to in this story. I had so much fun with those books. And just, to feel a little classy, I decided to add a nonfiction on here. The funniest and funnest nonfiction that I read this year, because going forward in 2025, I'm definitely picking up more nonfiction. But 2024, it was Will My Cat Eat My Eyeballs? This was definitely a quick and fun listen. I listened to it from the library. The author is a mortician, and she collected a bunch of questions that she has been asked by children and answered answered them for you, such as, will your cat eat your eyeballs when you die? What happens if you die in space? What happens if you die on a plane? What happens to your body if he gets left alone for a really long time? All of these questions get answered in a fun but factual way, and this will make you absolutely insufferable at social gatherings. After reading this book, I had such a hard time not just telling people about why your cat would eat your eyeballs if you died. There's reasons. Your cat's just not some horrible psychotic. There's reasons. I think if you want to be insufferable at any public setting where you have to talk to people, if you don't want people to invite you back, how about that? If you just want to be left alone, but you have to keep socializing, read this book, and then you can just scare people into ever inviting you again. But that, kids, is a list of books that I really enjoyed in the year 2024. 2025 is starting off good, and I plan on just powering through some books that I think I'm really gonna love. I have some plans on reading more classic, more backlist, and more nonfiction, but I'm on my fantasy nonsense right now, and I'm really loving it. I hope you had a really great reading year, and I'd love to hear about it. What was your favorite book that you read this past year? Maybe I need to read it. But if you had fun hanging out with me and the dogs, please subscribe. I hope you're reading good books out there, wherever you are, and I'll see you next time.